So, round four, candidates, let's do it. Only one decisive game today. That's the new thing, apparently. Kuryakin pulls into sole lead of the tournament. He beat Anand with the white pieces. The other matchups were Caruana Topalov, Nakamura Giri, and Svidler Aronian. Svidler Aronian, first one up. Let's go. They reached this position after Svidler's 21st move, so it's black to play here. And Aronian played a natural move, rook e8. Fighting for control of the e-file. So basically what's going on here is that Svidler has the bishop pair, but that's sort of balanced out by his weak pawns over here. So the position is probably equal, and it should be a draw, because of the fact that, I mean, it's going to be very hard for white to make progress. There's no real targets to attack, and yeah, it's going to be hard to make any sort of progress with these crippled pawns on the queen side. So yeah, Aronian played rook e8 because he obviously didn't want white to play rook e7. But in fact, alternatively, he could have played knight takes c4, which seems to lead to a draw almost even more directly than what Aronian did in the game. Because the obvious move rook e7, which looks like it's going to be quite good, because, I mean, the rook is pretty dominant on the 7th rank if it can stay there. It's attacking the bishop. If the bishop moves, this pawn might fall. And, for example, if he covers the bishop, then something like bishop d4 will happen, and the g7 pawn is hit, and that's quite annoying. But, in fact, black's got the resource rook f8, which secures equality because, well, the idea is he's going to go rook f7 next and challenge for the 7th rank. And, of course, if white takes the bishop, then Aronian would have rook takes f3 check, and then if king takes f3, then knight e5 check wins the material back. Something like king e4, knight takes d7, and white can take this. The bishop's trapped for a little bit, but there's no way to actually win it because that would require the king coming all the way over here, which very much will not happen because White's king is going to come over in time to stop that, and this position should be a draw. So yeah, rook f8 is a nice resource, again, based on the fact that rook takes d7 can be met by rook takes f3. So alternatively, white can play something like bishop d4, at which point black has the chance to challenge for the 7th rank, and so he's basically neutralized white's threats. And so white can, again, take this chance to win the pawn on a7. But again, this position, the computer says it's dead equal, and it should be a draw. Again, the bishop pair, but white's got no targets to attack, like, at all. In fact, the only conceivable target would be this b7 pawn, but it's, I think, as long as this bishop stays along this diagonal, is going to be physically impossible to access. And meanwhile, these pawns are isolated, but there's no real way for black to attack those either. And if he does figure out a way, white can probably defend them with ease. Going back to the game, so to recap, Aronian on move 21 had a chance to capture on c4, which probably would be the simplest way to achieve a draw. Instead, he played rook e8, which isn't a bad move by any means. That's also quite a decent way to hold the position. And again, if white trades rooks on e8, then it's going to be the same sort of thing. He's got the bishop pair, but there's no targets for him, and the game's going to be a draw. So Svidler tried rook b1 instead, sort of skewering the knight to the b7 pawn. And of course, if this knight moves, then the b7 pawn falls, and black's position falls apart. So he didn't do that. Aronian played instead bishop e6, allowing Svidler to capture this pawn. And then, rather than playing bishop takes c4, he simply dropped the bishop back to c8. And again, the computer is saying that white should have at least half a pawn of advantage, but I don't believe that, and neither did the players in the game, apparently. And white didn't find any way to win this position, because again, white's got an extra pawn in theory, but with these crippled pawns here, he does have a 3-on-2 quote-unquote majority, but it's not a very good majority, because I don't understand how you can ever create a passed pawn with this majority. And so the position's just a draw, because I don't see any real way for either side to accomplish anything. So white went rook b4, rook e5, rook a4, king f7, just to show how this continued. Bishop f5. Of course, rook b8 can be met just by rook e7. And again, you can see how there's no target anywhere, because white can't make a passed pawn as it is, and he needs to do that to be able to win. He can't make a passed pawn as it is, and he can't win any of the queenside pawns to create a situation where he can make a pass pawn. So this looks like a total draw to me. And of course, white pressed for a little bit. By the way, the computer thinks that white's now got like a pawn of advantage, but there's really nothing. Aronian's rook goes behind Spindler's pass pawn, and it's a total draw. Because there's no way to make progress. Because in order to ever queen this pawn, you would have to do one of two things. You'd have to support it from the rook like this, but would of course hang the pawn in every variation. Or you'd have to bring the king up to support it, and that's very not going to happen with this pawn here. So white went h4, and the game was agreed to draw. And yeah, there's no real way to win this. Rook c7 is possible, but again, you can't capture this pawn without hanging your own pawn. So there's no progress to be made. So, Caruana Topalov was an Italian game, which has been sort of a nice break from all of the Berlin defenses we've seen in this tournament. And appropriate for Caruana, even though he's not representing Italy anymore. Anyways, this is the position after move 36. Nothing of particular note has taken place. The game was equal for the longest time. White finally managed to make some progress, and now he's got full control over the b file. And he finally entered with his rook. He went rook b6, which could constitute a problem for black, seeing that this pawn is backwards and potentially coming under pressure. So probably at this point, he should give up his bishop for the knight, with bishop takes e4, queen takes e4, just to avoid knight on e4 pressuring this pawn. And here, white's still probably got some advantage. This pawn is still weak, and again, white's got control of the only fully open file. Black's got the f file, but white can probably play f3 at some stage to blunt that, and that shouldn't be all that relevant. However, instead of bishop takes e4, Topalov played queen e7, which allowed white to capture on d6. However, his idea was that he was going to play knight takes h3 check, which makes the game really weird all of a sudden. So queen takes h3 was played, and then Topalov went rook f6, attacking this knight. And his point is that there are a lot of things hanging. This rook on b1 is hanging, and the knight is hanging. Unfortunately, for that idea, white has knight c8, counterattacking black's queen. And then after queen d8, white has time to move his rook away from capture. Now, he played rook 1 b5, Caruana did, but this probably isn't the best. There's actually an improvement on this that should secure actually a winning position for white. Actually, there's a few moves that should win for white. For example, rook takes f6, and then after queen takes f6, to just play rook b2. And it might look as though black can win the piece back with bishop f5, but he actually can't on account of queen takes f5, queen takes f5, knight e7 check, and knight takes queen, and white will remain a piece up. So yeah, e4 could take place, but then once white moves the rook, black isn't picking up this knight. There's no way to trap it, and the knight's threatening to come out via a7 and back to c6 or b5. So white is more or less just a piece up, I think. Okay, so instead of that, black can try other things in this position, like, for example, rook takes f6. But this doesn't help. White can just play something like rook b7. And again, the knight isn't getting trapped. In this case, bishop f5 with fork can be met by queen f3, getting out of the fork with a threat, so black doesn't have time to capture the knight on c8, and then after black defends against the mate, the knight can get out via a7. So this is what Caruana should have done. One of the things he maybe should have done. Instead, he played rook 1 b5, which makes it a bit complicated, because by not trading this rook off first, Topalov now has the chance to capture on f2. And Caruana took on g6, and now Topalov had time to take on f1 with check, and then take the knight on c8. So rook takes f1 check, king h2, and queen takes c8. Now, yeah, and the problem that white has is that bishop is going to be hanging with check, and there's no way to make it not hanging with check. Like, if bishop d3, then black has time to capture here, and then take the knight back, and restore material equality. So anyways, rook takes g6, rook f1, king h2, queen takes c8, and then we reach this rook ending, which was eventually drawn. Clearly white's on the better side of it at the moment. He took on a5, so material's even, but white's got these two passed pawns, which are quite dangerous, and currently he's got probably the more active rooks. The game was eventually drawn. It's hard to say whether or not this should objectively be winning for white. But again, such a discussion is sort of beyond the scope of this video. In any event, Caruana didn't end up converting whatever remnants of an advantage he might have. So the game continued. Actually, instead of rook takes a5, he went rook c6, which maybe is a bit inaccurate, but who knows. And the game concluded as follows. So he's got connected passed pawns, but this pawn is equally scary. And yeah, if you take this, then of course e takes d2 and you can't stop the pawn. And now black's threatening rook d1, which will make the pawn unstoppable. So white's got to get in front of it before that can happen. Rook f8, and they agree to draw here, so maybe the game would have continued. Black's threatening rook f1, which again will make the pawn queen by force. So white played d7, and he's giving up this pawn in order to get this pawn, conceding that black's e pawn was more dangerous than his d pawn. And now this is just a draw, because black can play something like rook d4, and there's no way to make progress in this double rook ending really. This pawn is always in danger of being captured, so is this pawn. And well, as they say, all rook endings are drawn. Yeah, there's no way for either side to make progress here. So yeah, that was that game. Caruana certainly did have his chances in that game, but yeah, couldn't quite break through for his first win of the tournament. And actually, that's kind of good for Topalov that he didn't lose, because that would have been his third loss in 4 rounds, which more or less would have put him out of contention. So it's kind of good that we don't have one player that's just out of contention from the first few rounds. So he's still got some chances. I don't particularly like them, but his chances are still alive. And of course, Caruana's chances are also still very much alive, with a whole, 10 rounds to go? So Nakamura Giri was pretty interesting. This position occurred after Nakamura's 17th move out of a semi-slav. I should say that, as is typical for the semi-slav, this game is far too weird to properly explain in any sort of highlight video. So I'm just going to sort of play through the moves and make stupid comments as we go through it. And this position had been reached, I think, 4 times before. A couple of correspondence games. There was one game where actually Giri was on the white side of this position against Alexei Shirov. Played in 2014 in Hugavin, and now he's got the black side of this position, so that's pretty interesting. In that game, Shirov captured on f2, and went on to lose the game to Anish Giri, who then played e5. And it's extremely complicated and very much beyond the scope of this video to explain what's going on in this position. But, well, to sum up, after this knight moves, white's idea is to play b4 to deflect this bishop away from this knight. And then after bishop takes b4, rook takes f2, knight takes e5 or something. White's got a piece for 3 pawns, and it's utter chaos, basically. Anyways, Giri in this game, where he had black against Nakamura in the Canada's 2016, played g6, neglecting to capture on f2 and saying that he doesn't want to sacrifice a piece yet. h3, and now Giri deviated from the games that have been played here so far. Everyone had played g takes f5, not g5, g takes f5, and h takes g4, and then bishop d4, g takes f5, and then c5, or bishop takes c3, b takes c3, and then c5, and as usual, it was utter chaos. Black's king's kind of exposed, white's king's kind of exposed, someone's up a pawn, I'm not entirely sure who, And yeah, that game was a mess between someone and Shirov from the EU Championship 2015. And that game was drawn after a bunch of weird stuff took place. So anyways, the point I'm trying to make, everyone previously had captured on f5 here. Giri instead deviated with knight e5, which, according to the computer anyway, is a disimprovement, in that it's actually a worse move than the moves that have been played previously, although, what do I actually know? So, white went knight h6 check, king g7, bishop g5. So he's hinting at capturing on f6 and making black's king come to some unholy square. And Kiri says that he's not at all concerned about that, so now black's king is on f6, and that's pretty exciting. And so white decided to try to take advantage of that by going f4, knight c4, bishop takes c4, b takes c4, and now f5. So he's trying to break open the f-file towards black's king. c5 was played, opening this bishop's diagonal towards white's king, and yeah, I don't know what's going on here. F takes g6 check, king takes g6. This position looks terrifying for both sides, and I'm scared just looking at it. And here played was knight takes f7, because the knight was attacked and you have to move it, I suppose. Rook f8. And by this point, white, despite playing some sort of natural moves the entire way, he's now a bit forced to bail out because his knight's out of squares to go to at the moment. So he went knight d5, and now, yeah, the thing about black's king being on g6 is if he takes his knight intending to capture on f7 next, this is actually check, which is a problem. So instead of doing that, Giri captured on b2. And now white's problem is his knight is still stuck. And trading queens isn't really something he wants to do in any event, but even more so now that now his knight's attacked and his rook's attacked. And if he plays rook here, then black can play like takes, rook b8, and then white's got to waste another tempi moving this knight, and then this pawn is going to be extremely scary. So Nakamura was sort of forced to bail out at this stage and take the perpetual that was available to him with knight e7 check, king g7, knight f5, king g6, and so forth. And then a draw was made here. Obviously, you can't take this knight because then you're stepping onto the f-file, and that's really, really bad. And you will lose your queen following knight takes d4 and queen takes queen. So yeah, the draw occurred with knight e7, knight f5, and so forth. So that was a pretty interesting game. And I think even though Giri has drawn all of his games up to this point, I don't think we're giving him enough credit because since Giri tends to play in a very boring style, everyone's like, oh, it's Giri, of course he's going to draw all his games. But, I mean, to be fair, his games recently have been fairly interesting. They have led to perpetuals, like within 35 moves. But to his credit, they have been quite sharp and interesting while they were taking place. Right, so on we go to the only decisive game of the round, and that was Kuryakin Anand, won by Kuryakin with the white pieces. So the first interesting moment was in the opening, where Kuryakin introduced a novelty h4, which has never been seen before, and is interesting. Basically he's just hinting at knight g5, and making black worry about potential threats on the king side. And so, in a couple moves, black did weaken himself a little bit with f5 in order to ward off ideas towards h7 with knight g5 and stuff. Anyways, moving forward, we ended up at a position here where black had these hanging pawns. And by hanging pawns, I mean these are C and D pawns that aren't isolated. Neither of them are isolated, but there are no pawns adjacent to these guys. So these guys, in their own way, are isolated, and they can become targets. But if they're not targets, they do give black a lot of space. So black went bishop a6, and reading Grandmaster Arnautov's annotations to these games on chessbomb.com, this is the first moment where he commented that black's play is a bit weird. He says that he doesn't understand why black doesn't just go queen b6. Queen b6 followed by d4, which makes a lot of sense. And bishop a6 sort of looks weird generally speaking, the more pieces that are on the board, the better it is for the person that has the hanging pawns. But, I mean, there are some pluses to this. He's getting rid of a potentially strong piece. Maybe the light squares will be a bit weak. Not sure. But, yeah, now this leaves black's pawns kind of weak. So white's putting a lot of pressure on them. And Arnautoff comments at this point that this is the first moment that he really sees Anand as being in trouble. Because Kuryakin's intending knight d3 and putting a lot of pressure on this pawn on c5 and knight d3. So now this pawn is being attacked and it's induced to move forwards. And often, if you can coax this c pawn forward in hanging pawn positions, that's a significant concession on the part of the guy playing with them. So after b takes c4, black's going to end up with an isolated pawn, which is a disimprovement over having hanging pawns, because at least hanging pawns aren't totally by themselves, whereas an isolated pawn is. D takes c4 will run into knight e5 with a lot of pressure on the c4 pawn. Rook takes c4 is better, but it does leave this guy all by itself in a target. So when your opponent has an isolated pawn, you trade stuff off. So Kuryakin got queens off the board, and these rooks came off the board. And white is clearly better on account of his superior structure, in addition to this strong knight on e5. And Kuryakin demonstrated very nice technique. We're not going to go over this in quite a lot of detail, because, again, I want to keep this video under 20 minutes if possible. But yeah, he's just slowly improving his pieces. He's got his knight on a really nice square in front of the isolated pawn, as you should do. And he's got a lot of pressure on this guy as well. I think I mentioned this in an earlier video. The principle of two weaknesses is that you can't win just by attacking one thing, because you attack it and they defend it, and then you can't do anything. So you have to spread out you have to find a second weakness and spread out your pressure over those two weaknesses so that they have to get stretched out and try to cover both, which is far more difficult than just trying to cover one thing. So he's targeting these two isolated pawns. Rook c6. And then he repeats a couple times, and now he's still got significant pressure on this pawn. He can go knight c3 to target it. He can bring his king in to d4 when he's ready to. So Anand tried to relieve the pressure with rook b6, but it in fact just made it worse, because the rook came into d7, and now this pawn is being attacked a bunch of times. And after a6, knight c3, Anand simply resigned, because there's nothing to be done. Because now the problem with this rook being on b6 is that the threat is rook takes e7, followed by knight takes d5. So if black plays king e8 or king e6 or something, then this is winning a piece. Even if black's pawn were still on a7, this would still lead to a winning king and pawn ending. So there's no defense. What white's going to do next, if black plays, say, rook e6, white's going to play knight takes d5, and black can't escape the double exchange on e7 on account of the pin. So white's going to take twice, and then he'll have a winning king and pawn ending due to the extra pawn. So that was a great game from Kuryakin. Really nice technique. If not the most flashy game in the world. It was very, very well played by Kuryakin. No mistakes at all, I don't think. And he now stands in sole possession of the lead. But there is still 10 rounds to go. So just about anything can still happen at this point. So thank you guys for watching, and like and subscribe and whatnot. And go watch the other videos in the playlist if you haven't yet. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.